All right. Good afternoon. Today is the International Day of Remembrance of the victims of slavery in the Transatlantic Slave Trade. As you know, the Secretary General this morning spoke at an event commemorating this day in the General Assembly. He said that transatlantic slave trade is an indelible stain on the conscience of humanity. Today, he said, we remember the women, the children, and the men forced to work in agonizing conditions, savagely punished and deprived of their dignity and human rights, and we take strength in their resistance and demands for justice. The Secretary General said the obscene profits derived from chattel slavery and the racist ideologies that underpin the trade are still with us. He urged everyone to play their part in building inclusive societies free from the evils of racism. Those remarks were shared with you. Today is also the International Day of Solidarity with Detained and Missing Staff Members. 101 personnel from the United Nations were arrested or detained last year alone. In total, at least 52 of our colleagues are still in detention around the world. In his message, the Secretary General said, we stand with all those detained and with their families and loved ones, and we call for their immediate release and safe return. He urges governments to ensure the safety and security of UN personnel and to continue pursuing accountability and justice for these crimes while enhancing support and protection. In a video message today, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, also said the rights of all UN staff must be fully respected. Out of 52 detained colleagues, 23, as you know, are arbitrarily detained in Yemen alone. 8 of those are from the Human Rights Office. Their continued detention is a grave injustice, said Volker Turk. On this day, we renew the calls for their and all of other colleagues' immediate and unconditional release. And this morning, the Security Council heard from Special Envoy Geir Pedersen on Syria. He told council members that Syria stands at a crossroads, either to return to violence or to overcome conflict and revive the economy. To take the right path, he said Syria needs increased and continued international support. Mr. Pedersen will be at the stakeout to answer your questions after consultations are done. For his part, the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Tom Fletcher, said we are making progress on the humanitarian front, but we are now using more routes to deliver aid than before. He added that the reality, however, is still grim. 16 million, that's nearly 3/4 of the Syrian population, lack sufficient food, sufficient water, sufficient shelter, and sufficient medicine. We need to move with greater urgency, he said, while we still can. And moving to the situation in Gaza, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs tells us the situation in Gaza continues to worsen as intense hostilities continue for a second week. Yesterday in southern Gaza, OCHA and the World Health Organization visited the Nasser hospital, which was damaged in an attack on Sunday night. The team met hospital staff and spoke to emergency medical teams working at the facility, which is the largest referral hospital in South Gaza. WHO said 2 people were killed and 8 injured when Nasser's surgical ward was hit, with nearly 36 inpatient beds destroyed. In a post on social media, Dr. Tedros, the Executive Director General of WHO, stressed that health care should be protected and must never be militarized. In North Gaza governorate last night, 2 additional evacuation orders were issued following reports of rockets reports of rocket fire by Palestinian armed groups towards Israel. Between 100,000 and 120,000 people are living in the areas newly placed under evacuation orders, including 27,000 people sheltering in nearly 4 dozen displacement sites. 24 hospitals, 1 primary health care center, and 1 medical point are within the evacuation zone, while another hospital and 6 other primary health care centers or medical points are located within 1,000 meters. Since March 18th, more than 120,000 people are estimated to have been displaced from areas under evacuation orders. These areas cover about 15% of the Gaza Strip. That's roughly the size of Manhattan. This percentage does not include the no-go zones along Gaza's perimeter and the Netzarim corridor. Once again, OCHA stresses that civilians must be protected whether they move or whether they choose to stay. Civilians who leave for safer areas must be allowed to return as soon as circumstances allow. And OCHA also reiterates that civilians must be able to receive the humanitarian assistance they need wherever they are. All of this is required by international humanitarian law. Due to the evacuation orders issued as of yesterday afternoon, our partners working in water, in sanitation, and hygiene report that more than 100 water wells and over 3 dozen water reservoirs are currently inaccessible. That means they cannot be operated, they cannot be maintained, and they cannot be repaired. This places additional strain on the facilities that are still reachable, since they must work overtime, putting even more stress on the generators and on the pumps that activate the wells. OCHA also reports that most attempts by humanitarian organizations to coordinate access with Israeli authorities in Gaza are being denied. These denials are preventing humanitarian workers from doing even the most critical tasks, such as collecting supplies left at the border before the cargo closure began, or delivering fuel to bakeries that rely on generators to keep people fed. Yesterday, 5 out of 7 attempts to coordinate humanitarian access with Israeli authorities were denied. Today, 6 out of 9 were rejected. At least 220 temporary learning spaces in Gaza remain closed, which is keeping more than 60,000 children from accessing any form of learning. Public schools will remain closed for in-person classes until at least the end of Ramadan due to the renewed escalations. And OCHA also warns that with supplies dwindling, with no cargo having been entered Gaza over the last 3 weeks. Some critical supplies will only last a few more days, but unless the entry of cargo into Gaza resumes, food partners report a surge in demand for bread over the past few days. This is due to lack of cooking gas and rising wheat flour prices, which are preventing households from baking their own bread at home. As of yesterday, 18 bakeries out of more than 2 dozen supported by the World Food Program in Gaza are still operational. And moving north to Lebanon, the peacekeeping mission in Lebanon tells us they've signed a memorandum of understanding with the Lebanese armed forces yesterday, renewing the mission's support for both humanitarian and operational demining in southern Lebanon through the end of 2026. The memorandum of understanding provides the framework for UNIFIL's assistance to the government of Lebanon in a range of humanitarian mine action activities, such as mine clearance and explosive ordnance disposal. Such operations are crucial for protecting civilians and UNIFIL personnel from the danger of explosives and ensuring greater mobility for the mission's personnel. Just to note, this is the 3rd time this understanding has been renewed. The first one was signed in 2020. And turning to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs tells us they're alarmed by the growing toll that violence is taking on civilians in the province of Ituri in the country's east. Last night, armed groups attacked the Loda displacement site in Jugu territory, killing 6 displaced people and injuring many. That's what local civil society people are telling our colleagues on the ground. Clashes in the province are also continuing to displace civilians and to hinder the delivery of humanitarian aid, with relief operations largely suspended across the conflict-affected areas due to the violence. OCHA says it's very concerned by the proliferation of armed groups and violence in Ituri province. Since the start of the year, more than 200 civilians have been killed, with over 100,000 people having fled their homes in a province where 1.4 million people were already displaced. Elsewhere in the eastern part of the Congo, hostilities in parts of North and South Kivu provinces also continue to put civilian lives at risk. According to local civil society groups, yesterday 3 girls were abducted and raped by armed men in Kalehe territory in South Kivu. Our colleagues say this is part of a larger pattern of appalling sexual violence and other rights violations that have surged as the fighting has escalated in the eastern part of the country. We call on all parties to uphold their obligations under international humanitarian law and under international human rights law. All parties must do everything so that they can to protect civilians in military operations and also ensure the safe, the rapid, and the unimpeded access of humanitarian goods. Civilians must be protected and able to access the essential services they need to survive. Excuse me. Also in the DRC, we note that there was a communique issued yesterday by the presidency of Angola announcing their decision to step down from their mediation role between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We commend President Lorenzo of Angola for his unrelenting efforts, and we encourage the parties to remain engaged to find a political solution to the current crisis, building on their achievements of the Luanda and Nairobi processes. We also take note of the Second East African Community and Southern African Development Community Summit of Heads of State that was held yesterday on the situation in the DRC, including their decision to appoint a panel of facilitators. And turning to Sudan, we are gravely alarmed by the continued attacks on civilians across that country. Last night in Darfur, dozens of casualties were reported when airstrikes hit a market located about 40 kilometers northwest of El Fasher. Our humanitarian colleagues are also deeply concerned about escalating attacks on populated areas in Khartoum. In eastern Khartoum yesterday, there were reports of civilians killed and injured when artillery struck a mosque during evening prayers. Civilian casualties were also reported on Sunday as a result of heavy shelling in Omdurman, which is Khartoum's twin city across the Nile. We remind all parties, once again, and here as well, of their obligations under international humanitarian law to protect civilians, to protect civilian infrastructure, and to take all possible measures to avoid harm to civilians. On the health front, the ongoing hostilities and recent funding cuts by major donors have severely disrupted health services in Sudan, including in the Darfur region. Last month alone, nearly half of all reported attacks on healthcare facilities in Sudan took place in Darfur. Our partners working in health report that most facilities in the region have only 1 or 2 months of supplies left, with acute shortages being reported in North and South Darfur states. We and our partners continue to do all we can to meet the rising needs, despite the funding shortfalls and the access constraints due to the ongoing fighting. In North Kordofan, located in to the west of Khartoum, our partners assessed recently that nearly 58,000 human beings, including displaced people, returnees, and residents, are in urgent need of humanitarian assistance. A health partner is now operating a facility and mobile clinic, and distributions of food and non-food items are planned. We continue to urge the international community to step up support for the humanitarian response in Sudan, both through increased funding and pressing all parties to protect civilians, which is their duty, and also to protect aid workers and to ensure safe and unhindered access to people in need. And just south of Sudan, in South Sudan, following reports of renewed escalation in some areas in the country, the peacekeeping mission there is continuing its intensive engagements with key national actors to try to broker a peaceful solution. During meetings today with officials, including both the vice president of the country and the minister of defense, our head of the peacekeeping mission, Nick Haysom, from whom you heard yesterday, reiterated the urgent need to protect civilians, strictly adhere to the ceasefire, and resolve tensions through dialogue rather than military confrontation. Just to note that the mission there received reports of fresh aerial bombardments in Jikmir near Nasser in Upper Nile State, as well as new clashes between the South Sudan People's Defense Forces and the Sudan People's Liberation Army in opposition near Juba, the capital of the new country. And moving up to Europe and Ukraine, our colleagues at OCHA report that a massive attack yesterday in Sumy City, northeast of the country, close to the border with the Russian Federation, resulted in several dozen civilian casualties, including children. According to local authorities, nearly 100 civilians, including more than 20 children, were injured. 2 schools, a hospital, and a number of homes were also damaged in the attack. That's what local authorities and partners are telling us. Complementing the efforts of first responders, and immediately after the attack, humanitarian organizations provided first aid and helped transport wounded to hospitals. They also distributed shelter materials, blankets, and other necessities. Our humanitarian coordinator in Ukraine, Matthias Schmale, condemned the attacks in Sumy and recent drone strikes in the cities of Zaporizhzhia and Kyiv. Since the escalation of the war in 2022, The Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine has verified more than 2,500 child casualties in that country. It also noted an alarming increase in child casualties last year caused by explosive weapons in territories controlled by Ukraine due to intensified attack along the front lines in Donetsk region and increased use of long-range missiles, drones, and air-dropped bombs in large cities. And moving to Myanmar, the highly volatile security situation there continues to impact civilians with armed clashes, shelling, airstrikes, and drone strikes increasingly reported in conflict-affected areas in the past 2 weeks. Airstrikes in the region of Magwe and Mandalay in the northwest have reportedly resulted in dozens of civilian casualties and destroyed civilian infrastructure, including dozens of homes. That's according to local sources. The continued use of airstrikes and drone attacks pose a serious threat to civilians, further aggravating humanitarian needs and raising concerns about the protection of civilians in conflict-affected areas. The attacks worsen an already dire humanitarian situation, with more than one-third of the population, or nearly 20 million people, need assistance, and nearly 3.5 million people are internally displaced. Civilians face acute food insecurity and the near collapse of critical public services. Despite insecurity, severe underfunding, and other challenges, our humanitarian partners reached more than 4 million people with assistance last year. We and the humanitarian community reiterate the call on all parties to the conflict to uphold their obligations under international humanitarian law and to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure, including humanitarian workers and assets. We also stress the need to facilitate safe, sustained, and unimpeded humanitarian access to the most vulnerable people there as well. Quick update from Ecuador, where our humanitarian colleagues tell us that the request of the government of Ecuador, a UN Disaster Assessment and Coordination Team, otherwise known as UNDAC, arrived in Quito yesterday to support authorities to respond to the environmental emergency caused by an oil spill. The spill in the Esmeralda provinces in northwest of the country has severely contaminated key water sources, leaving 500,000 people without access to safe water and sanitation. We've received reports of an increase in respiratory illness, gastrointestinal disorders, leaving children and the elderly and those with pre-existing conditions at heightened risk. We'll keep you updated on both the situation and the response. And lastly, a note and a grim one on child mortality from the UN Interagency Group for Child Mortality Estimation, which warns that decades of progress in child survival are now at risk. Major donors have announced or indicated significant funding cuts to aid. The group says that these cuts are causing healthcare worker shortages, clinic closures, and vaccination program disruptions, and a lack of essential supplies such as treatments for malaria. These cuts are severely impacting regions in humanitarian crises, debt-stricken countries, and areas with an already high child mortality rate. Global funding cuts could also undermine monitoring and tracking efforts, making it harder to reach the most vulnerable children. The interagency group warned, also they said since 2000, child deaths have dropped by more than half and stillbirths by over a third, fueled by sustained investment in child survival worldwide. In 2022, the world reached a historic milestone when child deaths dropped slightly below 5 million for the first time. However, progress has slowed, and too many children are still being lost to preventable causes. Group members called on governments, donors, and partners across the private and public sectors to protect hard-won gains in saving the lives of children. More is available on the interweb. Deji.
Yes, several questions, but first, it's been reported that today U.S. said that it has reached separate agreements with both Ukraine and Russia to ensure safe navigation in the Black Sea. What is Secretary General's position on the latest development here?
Yes, we've seen the two announcements, which are obviously which are welcome. These issues, notably on the freedom of navigation and Black Sea, are issues that the Secretary General, his team, notably Rebecca Greenspan and others, have been working on since almost the start of this, the conflict, and there continues to be discussions on these issues.
So we know that there used to be Black Sea Grain Initiative. Is Secretary General intended to facilitate this ceasefire or be part of it or play a role in this?
I'll just say that the discussions on these issues have continued.
So UN is having discussion with parties.
I will leave it. I will leave it at that. We were not present in Riyadh, right? Rebecca Greenspan had been in Moscow yesterday as part of a pre-scheduled discussion on the issues, notably related to to the Memorandum of Understanding. She continues to have discussions on these issues in Washington and other places, and with key interlocutors. Michelle.
Thanks, Steph. A bit of a follow-up on that. You mentioned that she's been in Washington. Has she been talking
She had been in Washington, I mean, not in the last few days, but her work has been ongoing for quite some time. In fact, it's never stopped. So she's been in regular contacts.
Yeah, so who has she been talking to in the Trump administration? Did they seek her advice when they were ahead of this meeting in Riyadh? Do they expect her to play her or the UN to play any kind of role in this new agreement?
It's a little too early at this point to share more information.
So the UN will be a part of this agreement?
As I said, it's a little too early right now to share more information.
Okay, and given she met with the Russians yesterday in Moscow, what were some of the key sticking points that they've been raising on the MOU? If you can't tell us if she's involved or not, is she kind of rendered useless now?
No, I don't.
By this US agreement?
No, she's not been rendered useless, because I think both the amount of knowledge and experience that she and her team have accumulated is very useful to the parties involved. I can't speak to the issues raised by the Russian Federation during her meetings, but this was for her. It was part of her regular consultation to discuss the implementation of the MOU between the UN and the Russian Federation on food security.
And what were the issues that they've been working on?
The issues of the implementation of the MOU. Amélie, then Edie, then Benno, then Benny.
Thanks, Steph. Follow up on Sudan. You mentioned the airstrike against the market in North Darfur overnight. You said dozens of casualties. There are reports of hundreds of deaths and hundreds of injured. That would be one of the most deadly attacks in the beginning of the war. Do you have any more detail on what happened and on the situation on the ground and the number of people killed?
That's the only information I have right now. We'll try to get you some more. Edie, then Benno, then Benny.
Thanks, Steph. First, a follow-up on Rebecca Greenspan in Moscow. Is she still there, and is she...
No, ma'am. She's in Turkey.
She's in Turkey, which was a center for...
Yeah, I mean, it's part... this, yes, that is... I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut off the rest of your question before I tried to answer it. So you finish, and then I'll try to answer.
Well, Turkey was one of the key parties in the Black Sea Grain Initiative.
That is a statement of fact.
That is a statement of fact. So is this about possibly having Turkey be involved in any kind of a monitoring
I think we
mechanism?
I don't think we want to get ahead of ourselves. Obviously, anything having to do with the Black Sea, Turkey, by its geographic location, would have to play a critical part.
Is she planning to go to Washington shortly?
I have nothing to share with you on this at this point, but I will share something as soon as I can.
And on a follow-up on this Darfur attack on a market, this deadly
Yeah.
one, does the UN have any staff, national or international, in that area?
I do not believe we do, but it'll be part of my task to try to get a bit more information. Benno, I was waiting for Benno,
Yes.
please.
Thank
you for
you.
being. You're so polite. Yes, please
Steph,
proceed.
Deji asked yesterday about that email to staff having ID UN badge visa on hand in case authority asks for it. Now, 1 day later, I have it as well, and I just want to confirm with you, is that a direct reaction to the number of cases in which foreigners were detained and possibly deported outside of this country?
I think it was an email sent to advise people staff members who read the news and see what's going on, and just to play it safe.
I take that as a okay. Are there any cases you're aware of within UN staff that there like? Is there any detention or
No.
Okay. Are you aware of any staff member of member states being in that position?
I've not been made aware of any such cases. Benny, you're being polite too.
Me?
Yeah, I know. I was trying to throw you off your game. Yeah.
Please. Two questions, as they say in jokes. Stop me if you heard this one. The first one, follow up on that last question. Does that throw some kind of a shadow over the cooperation between the U.S. and the UN and the headquarter agreement and all of that?
Not at all. I think it's just some staff members were concerned, and frankly, I think it was a good piece of advice too. I don't think he throws a shadow over it.
I mean, is there any precedent for ICE people hanging, lurking?
No, I listen. I don't think there is no indication that there is a targeting of UN staff or diplomatic staff. I think some colleagues were probably a little nervous, and I think it's basic advice, right? And if you're not a citizen of a country and you're in that country, carry some ID to prove your status, and that was the advice given to our colleagues.
Have any UN staffers ever been deported from the United States?
Since
Ever, I said.
ever, I mean,
To your knowledge.
to my knowledge, I mean, I wasn't around. I haven't been around since 1945.
That's why
not
I'm
to my
asking.
knowledge. I don't. Well, it's a question. It's a strange question to ask, Benny, because if you are a UN staffer and you have a valid G4 visa, there's no reason for you to fear. So I'm not aware of any case, at least in recent memory.
Okay, second question, and again, stop me if you heard this one. So there was a report yesterday that this guy Khalil was an UNRWA employee. Any update on that?
No, I mean, from what I saw in his LinkedIn profile, he'd been an intern at UNRWA, but that's all I know.
So he was not an employee, just an
That's
intern?
that's what I saw in his LinkedIn profile, but I mean, you may want to
And
check.
what year is
You may
that?
want to check. You may want to check with UNRWA because that's. The
But
only,
what year was that?
Again, you may want to check with
You
UNRWA.
saw
for
it in his LinkedIn. So
my memory is not as good as it once was, Benjamin. Stefano.
Thank you, Stéphane. Can you remind us of what is for
No,
the
no,
U-
if-
that you for the UN?
Is it a
that-
question that could be answered with Google?
That no, from I don't think so.
Okay.
Remind us the definition of anti-Semitism for the UN.
The UN has adopted the IRA, if I'm not mistaken, definition of anti-Semitism.
So you confirm that if you
And it's
or any
it's
of
in
us,
it's in the report. I would encourage you to read the
Yes.
report that was issued.
So you just confirm that if any of us here in this room, we we criticize even heavily the Israeli government.
That's not at
We-
all what I said to you.
No.
That's not at all what I said to you. I would encourage you to read the report that was issued by Mr. Moratinos on this issue. Okay? So read the report.
But I think there is a we don't. I mean, I don't understand you. You don't understand me. I'm not.
That's
trying,
the story of our lives,
I'm
Stéphane.
not. I'm not trying to. I'm just telling you because you just say I don't see any reason why somebody with a visa and everything could be deported. But lately, we saw students from the Columbia University and others that they've been saying we are not anti-Semite, but they're going after us for our opinion about the Israeli government. So my question was, if us, one of us, or some UN staff will criticize even heavily the, I don't know, the Prime Minister of Israel, you confirm that this is not
I did not confirm
anti-Semitism.
it. I'll tell you what we are against. We're against anti-Semitism. We're against racism. We're against Islamophobia. We're against gender discrimination. We're also for free speech. That I'm confirming to you. Chris.
Hey, Steph. So on this email that was broadcast to UN staff, I know that you guys are saying...
It wasn't, from my understanding, it wasn't broadcast to all staff. It was broadcast by one department to its staff as a piece of advice. So I think that needs to be made clear.
Okay.
Okay. But go ahead. Sorry.
so
Which
ha-
department?
has-
Just, shui.
Has an email like that ever had to go out under any other
Not
administration?
not to my recollection.
Okay, so it is specific to the Trump administration.
It is specific to this date and time to calm the nervousness that some staff members had expressed to their supervisors.
And I know you commented on this yesterday already, but just for our records, can you just confirm again the total number of UN staff left in Gaza and what the plan is
Okay,
moving
so
forward?
about international staff, we had about 100 as of yesterday. We're down by about 25 fewer today, and there'll be more departures over the next few weeks. Senora.
Following on that topic, you said that the UN is not aware of being targeted, but also it's been said that there was an ICE van that was for an extended period of time on First Avenue. Isn't it that considered to be?
That's the first I've heard of it. I can't speak to that because maybe it happened when I was away last week, but I didn't. No one told me. I didn't see it. Did you see it or?
No, I read it.
Okay.
Okay.
So I don't. I mean, I don't mean to question you, but I'm saying I didn't.
Me neither. I
okay.
read it. I don't have direct
you and I are in the same boat.
witnessing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, and just a follow up on that. I know the change of gates was due to operational budget cuts, but can I rule out that it had any relationship with this?
With
The changing of gates for the staff to the
that it had to
visitors
deal with
entrance.
immigration issues.
Relationship to the suspiciousness of
Not. It has complete. I mean, it is unrelated in the sense that I can't confirm the premise of your of your question.
No, but in
it's-
general,
it is
the
fully.
concern of the
It has to
staff
do with
of-
operational and budget issues specific to this organization. That's the only reason.
and is completely unrelated to any concern the staff may have of being
completely,
targeted.
exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. You, please.
Thank you, Steph. My question is also Gaza. Two journalists were killed in Gaza on Monday. One is a member of the Al Jazeera, and another is a member of the Japanese news agency. So it's not first time to kill the journalist. But could you give me a comment about?
Sure. I mean, I think I commented on this yesterday, and I said it was yet another example of the dangers that journalists in Gaza and every conflict zone face to try to report the news, and journalists need to be protected in every way, shape, or form. Thank you. Deji, and then we'll go back to you, Benny.
Okay, Also on Gaza, you just mentioned about the water resource problem in Gaza. Yesterday, Kogat published something on Twitter, said that per person in Gaza, there would be available of 65 liters of water, including 18 liters of drinking water. That would be fair enough. I mean, you guys are not saying the same thing.
That is that is like my answer to Edie's statement. That would be a fair statement. I can tell you that when the gates are shut and fuel can't come in, food can't come in, basic supplies can't come in, it puts the humanitarian progress that we had seen since the ceasefire in full reverse gear.
That leads me to my second question. It's been 3 weeks since the last batch of convoy in Gaza. How? I know yesterday Edie asked this question, but can you give us some more details? Like how much can UN or UN agents still do in Gaza with that less and less food storage?
The way to describe the stock level is dwindling, and the way to describe what we can do is less and less. Benny.
Just to follow up on the Al Jazeera reporter who was killed, his name is Shabat. The IDF issued a statement today saying that he was a member of Hamas, including his serial number in the Hamas organization, his unit. They said he was a sniper, fighting against Israeli troops. Do you have any information to refute that?
It's another example of competing stories, competing narratives. I think one way to solve that would be to allow more journalists into Gaza. Thank you.